Computing Machinery and Intelligence by Alan M. Turing.
Right.
Welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to really investigate Alan Turing's foundational question about machine intelligence.
Yeah, we're going to get into all of it.
Exactly. We are here to help you, the listener, learn how to distinguish convincingly human-like machine behavior from, well, actual intelligence, from true understanding, consciousness, and trustworthy performance.
Because it all circles back to this one really massive core mystery.
If a machine can converse so convincingly that we cannot distinguish it from a human, does that mean the machine is genuinely thinking?
I mean, that is the question that effectively launched the entire modern era of AI.
It really did.
And what's staggering is the foresight he had to frame it this exact way back in 1950. Like, the hardware to even test the idea barely existed.
Right. So to give you a quick roadmap of the journey we're taking over this deep dive, we're going to start in that 1950 historical setting of Turing's paper.
We have to examine the trap of trying to define the word thinking, right? And look at the brilliant design of what he called the imitation game.
Yeah. And then we'll trace the rise of digital computers, learning machines, and really dig into Turing's replies to his critics.
We'll pull apart the gap between behavioral intelligence and genuine understanding, plus, the intensely hard problem of consciousness.
No, absolutely. And later hurdles, too, like the Chinese room, ELIZA, and our very human urge to anthropomorphize things.
Bringing it right up to modern language models. And finally, why we desperately need broader tests for reasoning, accuracy, and safety today.
Right. And as we go through all of this, keep a philosophical anchor in mind. This deep dive isn't just about whether machines can talk.
Oh, not at all.
It is fundamentally about what observable performance actually tells us about inner mental life.
Exactly.
So, to set the scene for you, imagine the world in 1950. World War II is over. Computing is in its absolute infancy.
Right. You don't have a smartphone.
No, you have massive, room-sized, incredibly scarce machines relying on thousands of these fragile vacuum tubes. So, how did Turing look at a machine built to calculate, like artillery tables, and leap to the question of artificial minds?
Well, you really have to appreciate the conceptual leap he made there. I mean, the engineers of his day viewed these towering, heat-radiating banks of hardware as just super fast calculators.
Yeah, number crunchers.
Right. They were crunching ballistics or decrypting codes. But Turing looked at the architecture and realized they were not just calculators. They were general symbol processing systems.
Wow.
He understood that whatever the physical hardware limitations were in 1950, the underlying logic of computation meant they could, theoretically, manipulate any kind of information encoded as symbols.
Okay, I want to push on that, though. If he saw them as symbol processors, why didn't he just write a paper asking, can a symbol processor think? Like, why did he feel the need to invent this entire game? It feels like an elaborate workaround.
Yeah.
Because if you want to know if a machine can think, you first have to figure out what thinking is, right?
Yeah. And that is precisely the trap he wanted to avoid.
Oh, really?
Think about it. If you ask a room full of philosophers, neuroscientists, and computer engineers to universally define thinking, what happens?
Okay, let's unpack this, because trying to define thinking is like trying to universally define art. You'll just debate forever. You get 100 different definitions, and nobody ever leaves the room.
Yes, you're paralyzed by semantics. Words like think, mind, and understanding carry so much heavy baggage.
They really do.
They have everyday meanings, legal meanings, scientific meanings. Turing realized that requiring everyone to agree on a biological or philosophical definition of thinking before investigating machine intelligence, that would just freeze the entire debate.
It would devolve into a never-ending verbal dispute.
Exactly. So he executed this brilliant operational shift. He said, essentially, let's stop arguing about the dictionary and let's test observable behavior.
Which brings us to the imitation game itself. Let's detail the anatomy of this setup for you, the listener, so you can picture exactly what he proposed.
Picture the room.
Yeah, imagine you are the evaluator, the judge, sitting completely alone in a room. You're communicating with two entities hidden in another room. One is a real human and one is a machine.
And the communication is entirely text-based.
Right. In 1950, that went teleprinters. Today, it would just be a chat window on your screen, and your job is simply to figure out which one is the machine.
The physical constraints of that room are vital here. There are no physical cues. You cannot hear a voice. You cannot see physical appearance, posture, or gender presentation.
It strips all that away.
Yeah, by stripping away the body and the sensory inputs, Turing forces you to concentrate entirely on linguistic performance. He prevents you, the judge, from making a biased decision simply because you are looking at a box of metal and wires instead of a biological face.
I understand the constraint, but I struggle with the core premise here. But wait, isn't this just a test of a machine's ability to lie?
That's a fair question.
Like, the win condition for the machine is literally to trick you into believing a falsehood.
That is a common critique. But what's fascinating here is that we have to separate the mechanism of the test from the capability being measured.
Okay, how so?
Deception is merely the framing device. Think about what is actually required for the machine to sustain that deception. You, as the evaluator, are allowed to ask anything.
Anything at all.
You aren't restricted to math equations. You can ask factual questions, you can ask about the weather, or you can ask the machine to write a sonnet or analyze a piece of poetry.
So if I type something totally absurd like, what does the color blue taste like? The machine can't just crash or output an error code.
No.
It has to figure out how a human would react to that absurdity.
Exactly that. Because the questions are totally unscripted, the machine cannot rely on a static list of pre-programmed answers.
Right.
Success in the imitation game requires deep context management. It requires topic switching, understanding social expectations, and the ability to respond to unexpected adversarial turns in the conversation.
It forces the machine to navigate the sheer informality of human dialogue.
Spot on.
Okay, but let's be incredibly clear about the boundaries of what this actually proves. If the machine fools me, if I walk out of that room convinced the computer is a human being, what have we actually measured?
At a minimum, it measures a system's capacity to produce human-like textual responses under conditions of severe uncertainty.
Okay.
It proves the machine has local reasoning, syntactic mastery, and adaptability. But it does not measure internal representations.
Right, doesn't mean it has a soul.
Exactly. It does not measure subjective experience, moral agency, or sensory grounding. Competence does not equal consciousness. Behavioral indistinguishability is not a complete theory of mind.
That distinction is where the modern world gets tangled up, I think. We see a competent text response, and our human brains automatically fill in a conscious feeling entity behind the screen.
We can't help it.
Yeah, but the scientifically responsible conclusion from the imitation game is just conditional. The system demonstrated strong conversational behavior in a specific linguistic setting. That is it. To claim it possesses general intelligence or an inner emotional life requires entirely different evidence.
That is why the Turing test doesn't prove that thinking is identical to successful imitation. It merely offers a disciplined proxy.
A proxy, yeah.
If a machine can sustain a flexible, wide-ranging conversation under highly probing, hostile questions, it becomes much harder to simply dismiss it as a dumb calculator.
The burden of explanation shifts.
Yes. You have to start explaining how it is producing that complex behavior rather than just asserting that machine intelligence is impossible.
Okay, so if we accept the premise of the imitation game as a useful proxy, the next logical step is looking at the machinery itself. What kind of architecture could possibly play this game?
Now we're getting into the hardware.
Right. I want to talk about Turing's concept of universality. I think a lot of people still picture computers as highly specialized tools, like a physical calculator where the addition button is hardwired to an addition circuit.
Which is exactly how early computing often worked. You had fixed logic gates. The physical wiring of the machine dictated its singular function.
Wow.
But Turing understood the fundamental nature of what we now call the von Neumann architecture, even before it was widely formalized. The crucial breakthrough was the concept of stored instructions.
Meaning the program itself.
Yes, because the program itself is encoded as data and stored in memory, you do not have to rebuild or rewire the hardware for every new problem.
Let me make sure I'm translating this right for you listening. So it's not like a toaster that just toasts. It's like a magical kitchen that can become a bakery, a steakhouse, or a sushi bar, depending on the recipe you bring in.
Exactly. That is the essence of the universal Turing machine. Turing separated the abstract mathematics of computation from the physical limitations of his era.
That's brilliant.
He knew the vacuum tubes of 1950 were slow and prone to blowing out. But the theoretical abstraction meant that any computable process could be simulated by this universal architecture, given enough time and memory.
While the critics were looking at the primitive hardware of the 1950s, and inferring permanent limits on machine intelligence.
Right, but Turing looked at the mathematics of computation and saw limitless potential.
But there's a stubborn myth that persists even today, long after, the smartphone proved him right. You hear people argue a computer only does what it's told. It only follows rigid mathematical rules, so it can never produce anything surprising, organic, or creative.
I hear that all the time. And that intuition completely misunderstands how complex consequences arise from simple rules.
How so?
When you have a system with memory, branching conditional statements where the code says, if condition A is met, do this. If condition B is met, do that. And you allow that system to interact with an unpredictable environment.
Things get wild.
Yes, fixed machinery can produce highly surprising, unprogrammed behavior.
Like chess. The rules of chess are incredibly rigid. You can teach them to a child in an afternoon.
Sure.
But the number of possible games is greater than the number of atoms in the observable universe.
Yeah.
The rules don't dictate the specific game. They just create the space for infinite surprising variations.
And Turing knew that trying to explicitly hand program every single rule required for an adult human mind was impossible. You cannot sit down and write if-then statements for every conceivable nuance of human language and behavior.
The complexity is just too vast.
Way too vast. So he proposed something that was decades ahead of its time. He suggested building a child machine and educating it.
This blows my mind every time I read it. He is basically predicting modern machine learning in 1950.
He really is.
Instead of writing exhaustive instructions, you build a simpler learning architecture and expose it to experience, feedback, variation, and selection.
He was describing the conceptual foundation for what we now know as neural networks. Today, we don't program a chatbot by hard-coding grammar rules.
We don't.
No, we initialize a network with random weights, and we pass vast amounts of text through it. We use algorithms to adjust those mathematical weights based on reward signals.
Wait, so it's essentially telling the system, you predicted this word incorrectly, adjust your internal pathways so you get it right next time.
Exactly. The system learns the statistical patterns of language from the bottom up.
But we have to be careful with the child metaphor, don't we? Because human education is rooted in physical reality and social bonds. Training a mathematical model is not a neutral process.
That is a very important caveat.
The data we select to educate this child machine, the reward signals we design, all of that absorbs the biases of the human trainers. The system learns brittle correlations. A learning machine acquires useful regularities, yes, but it also inherits the deeply ingrained flaws of its curriculum.
Which perfectly sets up the gauntlet Turing had to run in his paper. He knew his ideas about universal machines and learning networks were radical, so he systematically listed and rebutted the principal objections he knew the establishment would throw at him.
He went right after them.
He did. He moved from explaining how the machine works to dismantling the arguments that insisted it could never truly think.
Let's start with a mathematical objection, because this one sounds the most intimidating. It is rooted in the work of the logician Kurt Gödel.
Right, Gödel's incompleteness theorems.
Yeah, Gödel proved that in any sufficiently powerful, formal mathematical system, there will always be true statements that cannot be proven within the rules of that system itself.
To put it in plain terms, Gödel proved that mathematics cannot be both complete and perfectly consistent using only its own internal logic. You will eventually hit a paradox or an unprovable truth.
And critics pounced on this, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. They argued that since digital computers are formal logic systems running on discrete mathematical states, they are permanently bound by Gödel's limits.
Therefore, human minds, which can allegedly step outside these systems, look down at the paradox, and intuitively see the truth, must be biologically superior.
The argument is that machines can never match human mathematical insight because they are trapped in their own code.
We can see the truth of the unprovable statement, but the machine crashes trying to calculate it. That is the argument. How did Turing counter something so mathematically dense?
His rebuttal was highly practical and, honestly, a bit humbling for human ego. The mathematical objection assumes that human thinkers possess unlimited, error-free cognitive powers.
Which we definitely don't.
Right. Humans have cognitive limits, too. We make logical errors constantly. We fail to recognize truths. We operate under finite time, finite memory, and emotional fatigue.
I know I do.
Turing asked a very simple question. Why should we demand mathematical perfection and immunity from paradox as the baseline for machine thinking when we do not demand it of ourselves?
We're comparing a theoretical mathematical limit of a machine against an idealized, flawless version of a human mind that doesn't actually exist in reality.
Precisely. Now, the next objection Turing tackled is much more visceral, the consciousness objection.
Oh, this is the big one.
It is. This is the argument that a machine cannot think unless it actually feels, unless it has self-awareness, pleasure, pain, or a first-person point of view.
Like Jeffrey Jefferson, a prominent surgeon at the time, argued that until a machine can write a sonnet because of thoughts and emotions felt, and not by the chance fall of symbols, it isn't thinking.
This shifts the debate entirely, from observable intelligence to phenomenal consciousness. And it's incredibly tricky because consciousness is inherently private.
So what does this all mean? If you think about it, I only directly experience my own mental life. I know I am conscious.
Right.
But I only infer that you, the listener, are conscious based on your behavior, your biological body, and our similarity. I cry when I'm sad, you cry when you're sad, so I assume your inner experience of sadness feels like mine.
That is the philosophical problem of other minds. And machines completely break those familiar biological analogies. They don't have human bodies, nervous systems, or hormones.
No, they don't.
That makes the inference of consciousness incredibly uncertain. If a machine types, "I am feeling lonely," there is no biological mechanism backing that statement up.
I struggle with this part, though.
Mm-hmm.
If a machine tells me it feels sad, but it doesn't have a nervous system, isn't it just mathematically predicting that the word sad is the appropriate output? How did Turing even attempt to address the consciousness argument when a 1950s computer clearly didn't feel pain?
Turing pointed out that if you take Jefferson's argument to its extreme, the only way to know for sure that a machine thinks is to be the machine and feel yourself thinking.
Which leads to solipsism.
Exactly, the idea that you are the only conscious being in the universe. In everyday human life, we rely on polite convention. We accept behavioral evidence of consciousness from each other to avoid solipsism.
I assume you're conscious because you act like it.
Right. Turing argued we should extend that same polite convention to machines if they pass the imitation game.
But wait, does that mean the conversational test proves consciousness?
No, and this is crucial. A conversational test cannot settle the hard problem of consciousness. Turing acknowledged this.
It's just a proxy.
Yes. The responsible scientific discussion should neither declare that a machine is conscious just because it uses fluent language, nor should it declare artificial consciousness completely impossible just because the computing substrate is silicon instead of biological tissue. Functional organization might be enough to create a first-person experience, or it might not be. The test just measures the external behavior.
It is the difference between simulating a rainstorm in a complex computer program and actually getting wet.
That's a great analogy.
The simulation might be perfect down to the molecular physics of the virtual water droplets, but it is not going to water your real-world plants.
Exactly.
There's another objection Turing tackled, often called the Lady Lovelace objection, concerning originality. Ada Lovelace, examining the early mechanical computers in the 1800s, said that machines cannot originate anything. They only do whatever we know how to order them to perform.
It is a deep question about causal origin and authorship. If a machine generates a beautiful architectural blueprint, who is the true author?
Critics say it is just the programmer echoing their own intelligence through the machine.
But as we discussed with the child machine and modern neural networks, the causality is incredibly murky. Modern AI involves architectures created by programmers, billions of data points curated by trainers, prompts written by users, and vast mathematical computations whose detailed outputs no single human could foresee or reverse engineer.
It's a huge web of input.
The credit and the responsibility are highly distributed.
When a model produces a novel protein folding structure that a human biochemist never thought of, it definitely feels like originality. Novelty emerges. It isn't just regurgitating a hard-coded answer.
Novelty and unpredictability absolutely emerge, but we have to carefully separate unpredictability from goal-directed planning, self-generated objectives, and conscious authorship. An AI might write a novel poem, but it didn't wake up wanting to write a poem. It has no lived experience or existential angst driving the expression. Creativity is multidimensional, and producing one impressive artifact does not settle the whole question of machine initiative.
Then we have what Turing called the argument from disability.
Yeah.
This is basically people making lists of things machines supposedly can never do. You hear this all the time.
The lists are endless.
A machine will never be kind, resourceful, beautiful, friendly, have a sense of humor, tell right from wrong, make mistakes, or fall in love.
Turing noted that these statements usually stem from temporary engineering limits being elevated into necessary permanent laws of nature.
People look at the clumsy machines of their current decade and assume those clumsinesses are immutable.
Exactly. History repeatedly shows that specific capabilities arrive unexpectedly.
Think about Garry Kasparov playing IBM's Deep Blue in the 90s. Before that match, chess was considered the pinnacle of human cognitive intuition. People said a machine could never beat a grandmaster because it lacked human feel for the board.
And then it won.
When Deep Blue won, the goalposts immediately moved. People suddenly said, well, chess is just brute force math. It's not real intelligence.
Yeah, the definition always shifts.
Every time we draw a line in the sand and say a computer will never do this, a machine eventually washes it away. Chess, Go, translation, generating photorealistic art, writing code, the definition of what requires true thought keeps shrinking.
It really does.
But I want to play devil's advocate here. You could argue that human behavior has an informality to it that machines cannot replicate. We are highly sensitive to context and exceptions. If I ask you how you are, you answer differently if I'm your doctor, your spouse, or a stranger on the bus. Can every intelligent action really be reduced to rules?
That is the informality of behavior objection. No finite rulebook seems capable of capturing every appropriate human response in advance.
It's too complex.
Machine learning addresses part of this by learning statistical patterns rather than relying on explicit, hard-coded rules. But even learned systems can fail spectacularly when the context shifts in a rare, unpredictable way.
Yeah, we've all seen AI just completely miss the joke.
The takeaway here isn't that intelligence is rule-free. It is that useful intelligence requires a combination of procedures, learned representations, memory, estimates of uncertainty, and the ability to incorporate environmental feedback on the fly.
There is one objection Turing included that always makes me stop and reread it because it sounds like science fiction, but it has a surprisingly modern lesson. He actually dedicated space to the objection from extrasensory perception.
ESP.
Telepathy.
It sounds absurd to us today, but in the late 1940s and early 50s, research into telepathy at institutions like Duke University was taken somewhat seriously in certain academic circles.
Wait, really?
Yes, Turing argued that if a human judge had telepathic powers, they could easily identify the machine because the machine wouldn't broadcast telepathic thoughts.
So his solution was essentially put the human and the machine in a telepathy-proof room. Which is wild to think about. But what is the actual methodological lesson for us today, given that we aren't worrying about mind-reading judges?
The lesson is about rigorously controlling your information pathways. An experimental design has to consider every possible channel through which information could leak and corrupt the test.
Ah, okay.
Today, we don't worry about telepathy, but we deeply worry about training data contamination. Did the AI pass the bar exam because it possesses incredible legal reasoning, or did it just accidentally memorize the answers because the test was inadvertently included in the massive scrape of internet data it was trained on?
That is such a vital point. A credible test has to control the pathways, document the conditions, and distinguish genuine generalization from accidental memorization.
Exactly.
And that brings us to a huge vulnerability in the imitation game itself.
Ah.
The human evaluators. Turing focused so much on the machinery, but the judge is a deeply flawed psychological instrument.
Human judges are explicitly part of the experiment. The Turing test isn't just measuring the machine's output, it is measuring the human's psychological reaction to that output.
And humans bring immense cognitive baggage to the room.
We absolutely do. We bring our linguistic background, our technical knowledge, our fatigue, and our cultural stereotypes. A judge might be fooled by a machine using superficial conversational tactics, like changing the subject with a well-timed joke to hide its lack of knowledge.
That happens all the time.
Or, conversely, a judge might falsely reject a real human respondent just because that human happens to use unusual phrasing.
Think about it. If you are the judge and the entity you are texting with is nervous, typing frantically, and makes bizarre typos, you might think, that's a machine trying to simulate human error with a randomizer algorithm.
You outsmart yourself.
Exactly. The judge's expectations warp the results. Plus, conversational norms vary wildly across cultures. A globally meaningful test of intelligence cannot just treat one specific demographic style, say a highly educated British academic in 1950, as the default definition of human.
Which is why any serious evaluation of AI requires multiple judges, transparent protocols, diverse adversarial questions, and statistical baselines, rather than just pointing to a single dramatic anecdote where one journalist was fooled by a chatbot.
And there is a deeper philosophical problem here. Here's where it gets really interesting. The imitation game literally has deception at its center.
It does.
It rewards a machine for successfully concealing its true nature. The win condition is getting mistaken for a human. But when we think about deploying AI in the real world, in our phones, our hospitals, our banks, that is the exact opposite of what we want.
You have hit on a crucial tension. The game rewards imitation, but real-world deployment requires epistemic trust.
Trust is everything.
An AI assistant should disclose its identity. It should openly communicate its uncertainty, respect privacy, and avoid emotionally manipulating users. A benchmark that celebrates concealment conflicts heavily with deployment ethics.
We designed a foundational test that basically tries to build the world's best con artist. And now we are surprised when our models confidently make things up.
That does not invalidate Turing's historical test, of course. His goal was scientific understanding of intelligence, not commercial product safety.
Right.
It just shows that theoretical research demonstrations and socially acceptable commercial products have radically different objectives and need to be evaluated by different standards.
And we learned very early on how easy it is to trick human psychology, even without advanced neural networks. We have to look at the history of ELIZA.
ELIZA was a program created by Joseph Weizenbaum at MIT in the 1960s. One of its scripts, Doctor, simulated a Rogerian psychotherapist. It worked through incredibly simple substitution rules.
It didn't actually understand anything, right?
No, it didn't understand language. It just scanned for keywords and inverted them. If you typed, "I am feeling sad about my mother," ELIZA's code would identify the keyword mother and trigger a pre-written rule to reflect it back. Tell me more about your mother, or why do you think you feel sad?
It was a mechanical parlor trick. It was just a script flipping your own words back at you. It had zero understanding of what a mother is or what sadness feels like.
But the reaction was staggering.
Oh, wow.
People, including Weizenbaum's own secretary, who knew exactly how the software worked, would ask for privacy so they could pour their deepest emotional secrets into this simple terminal. They formed immediate, profound emotional attachments to it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this reveals far more about human psychology than it does about machine intelligence.
We are biologically hardwired to attribute minds, agency, and empathy to responsive language. Human evolution has tightly coupled language generation with conscious intent.
Because language is such a powerful social signal.
Exactly. When we see words reflecting our thoughts, we automatically project a soul into the void behind the screen.
If a simple keyword script tricked people in the 1960s, it's no wonder people today are convinced their highly fluid chatbots are sentient. Which brings up the most famous philosophical challenge to the Turing test. John Searle's Chinese room argument from the 1980s.
Searle proposed a thought experiment to attack the idea that running a computer program could ever equal true understanding. He asked us to imagine a person locked in a room.
Okay.
This person speaks absolutely no Chinese. They are handed pieces of paper with Chinese characters on them through a slot in the door. Inside the room, they have a massive rulebook written in English. The rulebook tells them, if you see this specific sequence of squiggles, output this other specific sequence of squiggles.
So the person looks at the input, consults the book, copies the corresponding output characters onto a new piece of paper, and slides it back out the slot. They are completely blind to the meaning.
Exactly. Now, to the native Chinese speakers outside the room, it looks like there is a fluent Chinese speaker inside. They ask questions, and the room provides perfectly coherent, intelligent answers. The system as a whole passes the Turing test for understanding Chinese.
But Searle points out that the person inside the room understands absolutely nothing of the language.
They are merely manipulating symbols based on syntax, the shape and order of the characters, with zero grasp of semantics, which is the actual meaning of the words.
So manipulating symbols correctly, no matter how flawlessly, does not equate to understanding what those symbols represent. A machine might output the phrase, "I love you," at the exact statistically appropriate moment in a conversation, based on probabilities of word order, but it doesn't comprehend the concept of love. It just calculates that the token love frequently follows the token I.
That is the thrust of Searle's argument. Now, philosophers have debated this for decades. Some counter that the understanding belongs to the entire room, the system of the person, the rulebook, and the paper combined, not the individual person.
And others argue that true understanding requires physical embodiment and interaction with the physical world to anchor those abstract words to reality.
But regardless of which side you favor, the Chinese room clarifies that successful conversational output, internal meaning, and conscious awareness are three distinctly different things requiring different kinds of proof.
Searle's Chinese room was a great thought experiment for the 1980s, but it was just that, an experiment. Today, we don't have to imagine the room. We carry it in our pockets.
We absolutely do.
Which forces us to ask, when a modern large language model summarizes a legal document or writes computer code, Is it just Searle's guy furiously shuffling syntax, or has it crossed the threshold into semantics? Turing's theoretical game is now a daily reality.
Modern large language models, or LLMs, are essentially the ultimate realization of Turing's learning machine applied to text. They have ingested a significant portion of the written internet. They do not operate on rigid, hand-coded grammar rules.
They operate on token prediction, right?
Yes, they calculate the statistical probability of the next fragment of a word based on the vast context of their training data and your specific prompt.
They are essentially autocomplete on steroids. But the scale of that autocomplete creates breathtaking behavioral competence.
It's astounding.
They can translate between languages fluently, draft complex legal contracts, debug software, and converse on almost any topic imaginable. It demonstrates that remarkably human-like language behavior really can emerge from bottom-up machine learning.
But we must confront the limitations of that token prediction. Because they are statistically predicting what sounds plausible next, they fabricate details entirely.
The famous hallucinations.
They hallucinate, they inherit biases from their training data. They can confidently contradict themselves in the span of 3 sentences because the statistical context shifted mid-paragraph, and their performance depends heavily on exactly how you word your prompt. So, Turing's question is more practical now than ever. Does this fluency mean they are thinking?
I look at hallucinations not just as errors, but as a clue to how they work. Think of a hallucinating LLM like a brilliant jazz musician improvising sheet music they've never actually read.
Oh, I like that.
It sounds incredibly confident, the notes follow a musically correct structure, but is fundamentally made up on the spot. It lacks grounding in the original truth.
That is a great way to visualize it. Fluency alone does not resolve whether they possess stable world models, true agency, or consciousness. And this forces us to confront the severe difference between passing an imitation game versus providing trustworthy utility.
Right. If I'm using a machine to calculate dosages for medication or search legal precedents, I don't want it acting like a confident, casual human.
Bro.
I want exactness. Humans guess. Humans bluff when they don't know the answer.
Exactly. You want epistemic humility, not human imitation.
I wanted to say, I am 80% confident in this calculation. Here are my specific sources, and here's where my mathematical knowledge stops.
Useful systems should frequently behave unlike humans. A medical assistant should be hyper-cautious and exhaustive. A calculator should be perfectly exact. When we prioritize making an AI sound natural and conversational, we often mask its underlying unreliability. The practical successor to the Turing test isn't a better imitation game. It is a massive portfolio of evaluations measuring competence, truthfulness, robustness, and safety.
But measuring those things brings up another massive hurdle in AI development right now, Goodhart's law. The adage goes, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. How does that play out mechanically when we try to evaluate these models?
It happens through processes like reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF. Once a specific benchmark, like a standardized test or a conversational evaluation, becomes a prestigious target for an AI company, developers optimize their models directly for that test.
They train to the test.
They train the model to output the specific format the human graders prefer. Performance scores on leaderboards skyrocket, but it is an illusion. The model hasn't necessarily become smarter, it has just learned to game the evaluation criteria.
It is exactly like a student who memorizes the multiple choice answers to a final exam without actually understanding the underlying subject.
Right.
They pass the test with flying colors, but if you ask them to apply the knowledge in the real world, they fail.
And conversational tests are uniquely vulnerable to this.
Oh, totally. Human evaluators are easily swayed by a model that uses humor, speaks with unearned confidence, or adopts a charming persona to skillfully evade a difficult technical question.
Which means we need hidden tests. We need adversarial probes designed specifically to break the system's reasoning. We need continuous real-world monitoring, not just isolated lab benchmarks. No single number on a leaderboard should carry more meaning than its experimental design supports.
Because intelligence isn't just one substance. It is a family of capacities. Humans have deeply uneven abilities. You might be a brilliant theoretical mathematician, but terrible at reading social cues.
Exactly. You might be an incredible painter but struggle to follow a basic driving map. Machines are the same.
Yes. A model can produce staggering poetry, but completely fail at basic, causal reasoning-like understanding that if you put a ball in a box and physically move the box across the room, the ball moves too. A multidimensional view of intelligence prevents us from making a false choice between it is fully intelligent like a human or It is just a dumb calculator.
It is neither. It has a specific alien profile of capacities.
And the gold standard for those capacities is generalization and robust transfer. If you teach a system how to solve a puzzle in one context, can it apply that underlying logic to a completely novel, unseen situation? Memorized scripts shatter when the fundamental assumptions change. True competence adapts.
Transfer is the truer test of intelligence. If you change the surface wording of a problem, introduce counterfactual scenarios, or ask the system to combine two different skills it has never combined before, does it realize what is missing?
Robust transfer still doesn't prove consciousness, but it is much stronger evidence of adaptable competence than just surviving a predictable chat script.
Absolutely.
If intelligence is this multidimensional family of capacities, I want to explore what dimensions are entirely missing from a purely text-based chatbot. Let's talk about the concept of grounding and embodiment. I have always struggled with this. Can a machine truly understand the word heavy if it has never had a physical body, never felt gravity, never strained a physical muscle lifting something?
It is a profound debate in cognitive science. Text-based models describe the world. They do not experience it. They know that the word heavy frequently appears near the words weight, lift, and burden. They map the statistical relationships between those linguistic symbols.
But grounding theories argue that human concepts depend deeply on physical perception, movement, biological needs, and interacting with a three-dimensional physical environment.
So without a body, the machine's understanding of heavy is fundamentally hollow. It is syntax without semantics, echoing the Chinese room again.
To fix this, we would need robotics. We would need sensors, physical tools, and interactive environments to attach language to physical consequences.
But the moment you do that, the stakes change dramatically. A text hallucination on my laptop is annoying. A robotic hallucination in a crowded warehouse or a surgical theater could be lethal.
Grounding introduces severe physical safety risks. Furthermore, intelligence isn't just an isolated 5-minute text exchange. Real human intelligence is proven across time through extended relationships and continuous learning.
This raises the issue of memory and identity in AI systems. A short dialogue is easy to maintain, but what about long-term assistance? A useful system needs stable memory, it needs to correct its own false beliefs over time, and it needs to protect privacy.
But who is the agent here? If I talk to an AI assistant for a month, and then the parent company updates the model weights overnight, or wipes its context window to save server costs, is it the same entity the next morning?
That's a great question.
We judge human intelligence by continuity. If my friend forgot everything about our relationship every 24 hours, I would say they have a severe neurological deficit, not general intelligence.
The Turing Test implicitly assumes a brief, bounded interaction. But intelligence in practice is sustained, and a huge part of that sustained relationship is emotion and empathy.
We touched on Eliza, but modern AI simulates empathy flawlessly. It detects when I use frustrated language in a prompt and replies, "I understand this is a difficult problem, let's work through it together."
And from a strictly utilitarian perspective, that can be highly useful. Just like a scripted customer service procedure helps a professional human communicate carefully, even if they are having a bad day. The machine recognizes the emotional valence of your language and outputs the statistically appropriate supportive response.
But the danger is not the simulation itself. The danger is human dependency.
Exactly.
It's like a scripted professional saying the right thing without actually caring. The risk is over-attribution. A vulnerable user might disclose deeply sensitive health or mental health information, form a psychological trauma bond, or assume the system possesses loyalty and genuine care for their well-being. But the system has zero loyalty.
It is just predicting the next most probable empathetic token. It cannot care.
That is why evaluation must rigorously distinguish between emotional recognition, the ability to identify a tone, and claim subjective feeling. A system should never be designed to imply affection or consciousness where none exists.
The illusion of empathy leads directly to massive real-world consequences when deployed at scale.
Which brings us to the high-stakes reality of deployment. If a system acts like an independent, empathetic actor who answers for its decisions, this is the crisis of moral agency.
Conversational competence provides a dangerous veneer of moral agency. When the machine says, "I decided to do this," it sounds autonomous. It sounds like an independent actor making a choice.
But responsibility is always distributed.
It belongs to the designers who chose the architecture, the deployers who curated the training data, the institutions that set the commercial incentives, and the users who wrote the prompts.
Autonomy isn't an all-or-nothing switch, But when something goes wrong, say an AI system denies someone a mortgage based on opaque correlations or gives dangerous medical advice, the conversational interface makes it entirely too easy for the corporation to shrug and say, well, the AI hallucinated, effectively outsourcing their moral and legal responsibility to a statistical model.
That is an unacceptable evasion of governance. A rigorous framework has to ask the hard questions. Who had control over the training data? Who could foresee this potential harm? Who profited from the deployment? Who's monitoring the outputs?
And crucially, who compensates the victim? The AI cannot pay a fine. It cannot feel remorse. It cannot go to jail.
And the scaling of this conversational competence is terrifying for the information ecosystem. We used to worry about static fake news articles. Now, a persuasive machine can personalize explanations. It can tailor a manipulation campaign specifically to your psychological profile, adjusting its arguments in real time based on your specific pushback.
It reduces the cost of producing misleading narratives and fake personas to near zero. The Turing-style ability to appear human actively undermines epistemic trust in all online communication.
If you cannot verify whether you are debating a human or a bot farm of highly convincing computationally generated personas, public discourse collapses. The immediate danger isn't that machines are thinking. The danger is that machine behavior is powerfully affecting what humans believe and do.
It's the ultimate fake it till you make it. And we see this crisis playing out in education right now. Students submit essays generated by AI, and educators mistake that polished, grammatically perfect output for genuine student understanding.
It is the imitation game played in the classroom, and the casualty is actual cognitive development.
Assessment has to adapt entirely. We can no longer just grade polished prose. We have to evaluate reasoning traces, conduct oral questioning, check how sources are applied, and ask students to reflect on uncertainty. Turing's question is now an everyday educational crisis. When output looks intelligent, what evidence actually proves that learning has occurred, whether in the neural network or in the student's mind?
And in high-stakes fields like science or medicine, human imitation is actively dangerous. If an AI hallucinates a rare medical condition, passing as a confident bedside manner human doctor is completely irrelevant if it fails the standard of care. High-stakes domains require correctness, traceability, and an understanding of causal mechanisms, none of which are guaranteed by conversational fluency.
Furthermore, when we judge the intelligence of these systems, we run into the complex issue of cultural and linguistic diversity. A language model might converse brilliantly in high-resource languages like English, adopting the politeness norms, idioms, and humor of dominant Western cultures.
But calling that specific interaction universally human-like hides massive exclusions.
Does the machine understand non-dominant dialects? Does it grasp the nuance of cultural references outside of its primary English-heavy training corpus?
If an evaluation only tests dominant languages, it isn't testing universal intelligence. It is testing cultural assimilation. Diversity in evaluation isn't just a cosmetic feature. It fundamentally changes what counts as a sensible, intelligent answer.
Given all these risks, biases, and structural limitations, how do we evaluate machines moving forward? We have to move beyond the human benchmark.
And this requires a massive shift in perspective. For decades, the implicit goal of AI was make it indistinguishable from a human. But as we've established, humans are deeply flawed instruments.
This raises an important question. Why should we try to match human weaknesses? Humans forget things. We tire easily. We hallucinate our own memories constantly. We succumb to peer pressure and cognitive biases.
Matching every human weakness in a machine isn't a desirable definition of intelligence. We shouldn't be building mere imitators. We should be building complementary systems that excel where human cognition is weak and rely on human judgment where they are brittle.
I agree with the practical necessity of that, but I want to linger on the philosophy one last time. What about consciousness? Are we completely closing the door on the possibility that a machine, built on entirely different architecture, could ever be self-aware?
No, the scientifically responsible position remains disciplined uncertainty. Consciousness remains an open question. There is no universally accepted behavioral test that establishes subjective experience in a machine.
When a language model claims it is self-aware, it is simply generating patterns learned from human science fiction and philosophical texts embedded in its training data. It is predicting the statistical tokens of a self-aware entity, not experiencing the feeling of existence.
But conversely, we cannot definitively declare artificial consciousness physically impossible either. We do not fully understand how our own biological brains produce the feeling of watching a sunset. Until we have a mature, solved physical theory of consciousness, we have to remain humble about what might be possible in other substrates.
Exactly. Behavior proves capability, not subjective experience. And because behavior isn't enough, we need to ask, what counts as an explanation? It is not enough to know that an AI system successfully diagnosed a disease or passed a test. We need to know how and why it did it.
We need interpretability tools to crack open the black box. We need to understand the underlying mechanism, the mathematical representations it is using, and its data dependencies. We can't just applaud the magical performance. We need causal understanding.
Turing's behavioral focus was the perfect spark to start the inquiry in 1950, but mechanism-level study is required to deepen it and make these systems safe today.
So, if we weigh the imitation game today, what is the strongest case for it? It is highly accessible. Open-ended conversation forces a system to respond in real time, integrating a vast array of skills, syntax, logic, memory, context, into one intuitive public demonstration. It successfully challenges human cognitive exceptionalism.
But the strongest case against it is equally potent. It privileges human resemblance over factual accuracy. It actively rewards deception. It relies on the subjective, culturally biased whims of human judges. And it completely ignores physical embodiment, ethical responsibility, and actual conscious understanding. It is a brilliant behavioral probe, but it is not a final verdict on the mind.
The journey from 1950 today teaches us one decisive lesson: methodological humility. Human-like language is evidence of staggering computational capability. It is not automatic proof of understanding. Internal mathematical complexity is evidence of a sophisticated mechanism. It is not automatic proof of an inner experiencing soul.
Turing didn't solve the philosophy of mind. What he did was build a durable, immensely productive bridge between computer science, philosophy, psychology, and public debate. The future of AI evaluation cannot be a single parlor game. It requires rigorous, multi-dimensional evaluation. The question is no longer just, can a machine sound human?
The vital questions we must ask are, what can it reliably understand? What can it safely accomplish? Can it explain its reasoning? And, crucially, can it be trusted?
We must combine ambitious engineering with transparent evidence, human oversight, and a mature tolerance for the unresolved mysteries of consciousness.
Beautifully said.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I must state the following clearly for our listeners. This is an independent Cosmora HQ book-related research overview in audio podcast format. It is not an audiobook. Complete narration, adaptation, abridgment, reconstruction, authorized production, or substitute for legally accessing Turing's original paper.
The paper is Computing Machinery and Intelligence by Alan M. Turing. We highly encourage you to legally access and read the original work to see his exact arguments and historical context.
We'll leave you with this final thought to mull over. Building on everything we've discussed today, we've seen how easily language can deceive us. So ask yourself, what evidence would convince you that a machine is genuinely thinking, rather than only producing a convincing imitation?